How bad can a man's life get at most? Or rather, a woman's life, actually. How bad can the life of someone get who was born male, had their sex changed without their knowledge, and later became male again? So the situation is quite complicated. But while you like the video and subscribe to the channel, I can start telling the story. In 1965, a young couple living in Canada, Janet and Ron Reimer, were about to have their first children, and they were twins. Both were born male. Their names were Brian and Bruce. At first, both baby boys were actually quite healthy. However, when they were 8 months old, their parents noticed that the babies were having difficulty urinating and took their sons to the doctor. At the hospital, it was discovered that both babies had phimosis. This condition occurs when the opening at the tip of the foreskin is too narrow, preventing it from being pulled back. So it became clear why the babies were having difficulty urinating. As a treatment, the doctor recommended that both of them be circumcised. Although Janet initially had some doubts, they made a joint decision with the father and gave consent for the circumcision for the sake of their babies' health. It was decided that Bruce would be operated on first, and the procedure began. However, during this simple operation, the doctor chose to use an electrocautery device, which is still used today, instead of a scalpel. This instrument is used to cut tissue using high heat. In short, it both cut and sealed the tissue using heat, preventing bleeding. However, something went terribly wrong, and the doctor caused almost the entire organ to be burned. Naturally, the damage was too severe to repair. His twin brother Brian was not as unfortunate as Bruce. After seeing the failure of the operation, the parents decided not to let Brian undergo the same procedure, thinking he might suffer the same outcome. Although his condition eventually improved on its own over time, in this story, it was Bruce who was left with severe damage. While Bruce's parents were desperately searching for a solution for him, they came across a talk on television by psychologist John Money, who had become famous for his work on gender studies. At the time, Money was considered one of the leading gender researchers in the United States. This situation became a source of hope for Bruce's mother as well. Janet wrote a long letter to psychologist John Money, explaining the terrible accident her son had gone through. The case also seemed interesting to the doctor. The mother received a response to her letter quite quickly and within a few weeks. They went to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore to see psychologist Money. Money believed that a person's gender identity was a social construct and the result of upbringing. In other words, how a person was born did not matter. Therefore, he argued that it was possible to teach someone to identify differently from their biological sex. According to him, people were not born as a specific gender. They were taught what gender they were. He also believed that children were gender neutral until around the age of 2, and theorized that parents had a period he called a gender gate, during which they could behaviorally influence their child's gender. Note that this had not been proven, was still just a theory. So things were not going to go very well. Based on this theory, he made a radical proposal to surgically reassign Bruce's sex. Essentially, the idea was to remove his remaining damaged genital tissue and construct a female genital structure in its place. In this way, Bruce would be raised as a girl, and his previous identity would not be told to him. Although the idea seemed dangerous and dark, the family, after thinking for a while, unfortunately agreed to this surgery as well. They were parents, after all. Perhaps, in their own way, they believed they were doing what was best for their child. However, neither of them knew what was about to happen. And most importantly, Bruce, of course, had no consent regarding this operation. The troubled transition process began shortly before his second birthday in 1976. While the family was living a nightmare, for the psychologist, it had become an incredible opportunity. With this operation, a path had opened for him to test his gender gate theory. The operation was carried out successfully. Following the psychologist's advice, Bruce's name was changed to Brenda. In other words, she would continue her life as Brenda Reimer. In addition to the sex reassignment surgery, Brenda was also given estrogen supplements to help feminize her body. During this process, the Reimers visited Money's office every year. This allowed the doctor to observe both twins, Brian and Brenda, as they grew up, one as a boy and the other as a girl. After a while, this radical study became known as the John Joan case, and these subjects, whom the doctor had found as volunteers, were a remarkable opportunity for him. Money noted that the twin raised as a girl, Brenda, was much more well-adjusted than her brother Brian. He also described Brenda as more stubborn and dominant, and of course, he did not want to interpret these as traits typically associated with males. Otherwise, he would have been contradicting his own theory. In 1975, when the twins were 9 years old, Money published his study in a book called Sexual Signatures, where he described Bruce's forced transition to Brenda as a success. In the book, he stated that the girl preferred wearing dresses instead of pants, enjoyed ribbons in her hair, bracelets, and frilly blouses, and liked being her father's little sweetheart. He also said that throughout her childhood, her stubbornness and the abundant physical energy she freely shared with her twin brother made her a tomboy, but still a girl. But was Brenda truly choosing these things herself, or were these preferences being forced into her subconsciously? I think you already understand the answer to that question. This situation would come to light in the following years. In reality, nothing was as good as psychologist Money had claimed. As the years passed, Brenda began to feel that something was wrong with her, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Naturally, after a while, she started experiencing psychological difficulties. These problems eventually began to affect her life at school as well. Yes, Brenda appeared to be a girl, but she also displayed some masculine behaviors. Her classmates began to mock and bully her because of her masculine walk and voice. This situation continued to affect Brenda more and more negatively. When her family noticed this, they finally consulted other doctors, and based on their advice, as the twins were approaching adolescence, the Reimers were convinced that they needed to tell their children the truth. In 1980, just before a psychologist appointment, their father, Ron Reimer, took both children to a restaurant and told them the whole truth. After this long-hidden secret was revealed, they once again found themselves on the way to the psychologist. When Brenda learned the truth, she suddenly understood why she had felt that way. "I wasn't a strange person. I wasn't crazy," she said. Now, she could make sense of most of what she had experienced. After these revelations, painful truths began to come to light. In fact, Brenda's frequent visits to psychologist Money's office were quite traumatic. When Bruce had only recently been raised as Brenda, explicit images of nude adults were shown in an attempt to reinforce her gender identity, and Money pressured her to undergo a series of surgeries that he claimed would make her more feminine. When these were revealed in front of other doctors, the truth about the twins came out, and naturally, the secret devastated the family. The father fell into alcoholism, and the mother attempted suicide. Brenda's twin brother Brian later became involved in substance abuse and minor crimes. Janet also said that she was not blind to her child's discomfort with a female gender identity. She remembered that when Brenda was first made to wear a dress, she angrily tore it apart. "There were doubts all along," she said, "but I didn't have the strength to face them because I couldn't bear the possibility of being wrong." After discovering the truth, Brenda chose to return to her original sex living as a male and took the name David. At last, she was able to make decisions for herself. He underwent numerous surgeries to transition back to male, the identity that had been changed without his consent. These included, after years of estrogen treatment, a double mastectomy to remove the developed breasts and the construction of an artificial version of male genitalia to replace the previous one. This time he also began receiving testosterone therapy. In short, he was living another nightmare, just to undo the ones he had already endured, and none of it had been within his control. After a while, the physical stress began to damage his mental health. What he had gone through was incredibly for him. In his early 20s, David attempted to take his own life twice, but fortunately, he did not succeed. However, he entered a deep depression that would last for years. He was a very strong person. Despite all the pain, he found love and married a woman named Jane, at least at one point. His life was able to move forward the way he had planned. His family life was not bad either, and most importantly, it was his own choice. Everything was going well, and the years were passing. They were about to leave their 14th year of marriage behind. He was his stepfather to Jane's 3 children, and since having his own biological child wasn't possible, He devoted his life to them, spending time camping, fishing, and collecting antiques and old coins. In his own way, he had found ways to hold on to life. These were some of the most colorful times of his life. There was something that weighed on him. It was the help he couldn't give to people who might one day live a life similar to his. Hoping that speaking about his experience could prevent doctors from making similar decisions for other babies, he agreed to work with a sexologist named Milton Diamond. Diamond had previously criticized psychologists. Money's work due to a lack of evidence, and had begun working extensively with David to challenge his theory that gender identity could be entirely taught or learned. The first thing to be discussed and shared was, naturally, the hardships David experienced during his childhood, and the two began making all of this public. These revelations attracted tremendous attention and sparked a strong reaction in society, however. Even though this brought him some sense of relief, David could never fully come to terms with his past. He couldn't shut out the memories of those dark days from his mind. David also had a brother, as you may remember, the twin from whom he had hoped to receive the most support, but who stayed distant and largely absent. In 2002, he died after an overdose of antidepressants. The reason I didn't mention him much in the story is that he was not really present. But whether it was because of their twin bond or simply a brotherly connection, David fell into a deep depression once again. Just as he was starting to pull himself together, having found his identity and helping others find theirs, just as there was a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel, he fell back into darkness again. His already fragile mental state was shattered by his brother's death, and you can't help but wonder how much more life could throw at him. After this, David also lost his job. Amid a broken mental state and a life marked by financial struggles, when his wife told him she wanted a divorce, all his hope for life was gone. Poor David, 2 years after his brother's death, in May 2004, at just 38 years old, chose to end his own life. He came into the world as a male, was later turned into a female, and then, by his own decision, transitioned back to being male. Perhaps he even regretted that choice, because although he had been raised as a girl, he felt himself to be male. Trapped between two sides within his mind, every path had been closed off for him one by one, and if this short life had to be summarized in one sentence, Bruce was born, Brenda grew up, and David died. That's all from me. For more, subscribe to the BATUNIGMA channel, and don't forget to like the video. See you in the next video.